Clockmaker's Widow by Clara Voss. Chapter 1. The Attic Breathes. The house on Elderberry Lane had been still for nearly 3 years, slumbering behind ivy-veiled stone in a wrought iron gate rusted by the weight of seasons. Now, with a single key turning in a tarnished lock, it stirred again. Clara Edevane stood at the threshold, her gloved hand trembling around the brass knob. Her breath caught as the heavy oak door groaned open, not from disuse, but as though it resented being disturbed. Dust curled in the air like memories unsettled, and the scent of cedar, mothballs, and thyme drifted out to greet her. This was not just a house. This was where Edmund had lived, had died. Her husband, a renowned clockmaker, had passed quietly, perhaps too quietly, in this home, leaving behind unfinished clocks, silent rooms, and questions wrapped in grief. The coroner had said it was natural causes. Clara had said nothing. She hadn't known how. Now, 3 years later, she had returned. Not out of sentiment, not out of healing, but because the letter arrived. Scrawled in unfamiliar ink and sent without a return address, it had read only, "You left too soon. The attic chimes still." Clara had not told anyone. She simply packed her suitcase, donned her black wool coat, and boarded the first train back to Glome Hollow, a town as forgotten as the house it cradled. The foyer was just as she remembered. Floorboards sighed beneath her boots. Faded wallpaper peeled in the corners like skin under time's fingernails. A portrait of Edmund still hung above the staircase, his eyes following her as she entered. "I didn't think I'd come back," she whispered to the silence. No silence is truly silent in an old house. Somewhere above, wood creaked faintly, though there was no wind. She ignored it, for now. Clara spent the day unpacking what little she'd brought, mostly books and old letters she couldn't bear to leave behind. She placed them gently on the oak desk in Edmund's old study, then lit the fireplace with care, its embers licking at the chill that clung to the walls like mildew. Evening fell quickly in this part of town. Fog rolled in from the moors, pressing against the windows with ghostly patience. By nightfall, the house looked entirely swallowed in gray. Clara lit a single candle and settled into a chair near the fire. Her tea had gone cold. The grandfather clock in the hall, one of Edmund's earliest works, remained mute despite its age-old precision. He had wound it every night. After he passed, no one had dared. She glanced at the mantel clock. 11:59 p.m. The house breathed. A floorboard above her head popped sharply, then another. Clara rose slowly. The candle flickered in her grasp. Midnight. A sound stirred in the bones of the house, a deep, resounding chime. It wasn't from the grandfather clock. It came from above, from the attic. Clara froze. She had not touched that room since Edmund's death. The door was always locked. The key she'd buried in a drawer with old photographs and wedding rings. And yet the chime came again, low, distant, and unmistakably mechanical. Her hand moved on its own, taking the candle up the stairs, each step groaning beneath her weight. The air grew colder as she climbed, and with it came the scent of metal and oil, familiar, cloying, unmistakable. The attic door stood ajar. That was impossible. She had locked it. She remembered it clearly, how her fingers had trembled, how she'd whispered goodbye into the darkness before turning the key. But it stood open, just enough for a sliver of darkness to peer back at her. The candle trembled in her hand. She should go back downstairs. Wait until morning. But Clara Edevane had never been good at leaving mysteries untouched. She pushed the door open. The attic welcomed her like a grave. The walls were lined with clocks, grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks, carriage clocks, even small silver watches resting atop dusty shelves, each one still, each one frozen in time. Except one. At the far end of the attic, beneath a dusty black drape, a tall clock stood upright, its pendulum swinging silently, its hands now resting at 12. Clara's feet moved slowly toward it, candle held high. As she approached, the air thickened and the scent of oil grew stronger. She reached out, fingers grazing the cloth. And then footsteps behind her. She turned quickly. The attic was empty. The clocks ticked. Ticked? No, they were all ticking now. Every one. Loud, rhythmic, deafening. Then the tall clock chimed again. Once, twice, the third time. And through the wavering candlelight, a figure emerged. Not solid, not whole, but real enough. A man in a long coat, his head bowed, face half hidden in shadow. He walked across the attic floor, slow and deliberate, leaving no sound, no footprint. Clara pressed herself against the wall, watching in paralyzed awe as he retraced an invisible path, stopping at a workbench she had nearly forgotten. There, he paused, bent low, and then mimed an action so strange, so out of place, it made her heart stumble. He lifted his hand and stabbed, but there was no blade, no victim. Only the gesture, repeated slowly, again and again. Clara's breath caught. The figure vanished like smoke, and the clocks all fell silent. She was alone again, or so she hoped. Back in her bedroom, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands still trembling. That wasn't a memory. It wasn't a dream. It was a ritual, a haunting reenactment. A murder. But whose? And why here? She stared at the attic key now resting on her nightstand, cold and rusted, though she had not seen it in years. Beneath the silence of the room, she heard the faintest tick. The clocks were waiting. So was the truth. And perhaps so was Edmund. Chapter 2, Echoes in Brass. By morning, the attic might have been a dream. The clocks, silent once more. The ghostly figure vanished. Only the thin coating of soot on Clara's candle and the rusted attic key beside her pillow suggested the night had not been imagined. Claire stood in the kitchen, her hands curled around a chipped porcelain cup, letting the tea steep too long. The house sat in a hush, watching her. She hadn't slept. Instead, she had sat upright until dawn breached the horizon, her eyes fixed on the attic door across the hall, waiting for movement that never came. The whisper of the murder replayed itself again and again, a ghost retracing forgotten steps, a blade that wasn't there, a story trying to be told. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked once, faintly. Clara turned sharply toward it. Still unmoving, still dead. But something about the rhythm unsettled her. It was as though the clock wanted to work again, was straining to chime. She set her teacup down and crossed the hall. The moment she stepped near the old clock, a chill slithered up her spine. The carved wood was cold to the touch, and then she saw it. A fine scratch beneath the glass panel, new, sharp, deliberate. She knelt, squinting. It wasn't just a scratch. It was a symbol. A loop crossed by a line etched into the frame like a secret signature. She had never seen it before, and she had dusted this clock often, back in those lonely months after Edmund's death, when cleaning had felt like penance. She straightened, heart tight in her chest. The symbol stirred a memory, vague and shapeless, a time when Edmund had forbidden her from the attic. Too many old things, he'd said. Things better left alone. But now the house had brought her back, and the attic had stirred. She would not pretend again. Clara returned to the attic in the soft gray of morning, when the light filtered through slats in the roof like sunbeams through stained glass. It made the dust look sacred, made even the broken clocks seem holy in their silence. She approached the tall grandfather clock, the one that had chimed at midnight. Its hands were now at 4:17. Unmoving. Impossible. Clara touched the face, half expecting it to be warm. It was not. Beneath the base, something had shifted, an edge of wood, slightly ajar. She crouched, pushing gently against the floorboard. It creaked up, revealing a narrow gap just large enough for a bundle of papers tied in a black ribbon. She pulled it free. The parchment was yellowed, stiff, and smelled of oil and rosewater, Edmund's scent. With trembling fingers, she untied the ribbon and unfolded the first page. It was a diagram of a clock's internal mechanisms, yes, but not just any clock. This one was labeled Chronic Repeater MK2 Echo Memory Housing. Below, in Edmund's tight, elegant script, time is a door. Memory is the key. What if one could step through? Clara's breath caught. This wasn't just clockwork. It was obsession. She flipped through the next few pages, notes scrawled hastily, margins full of revisions, underlined phrases. Observed behavioral loop initiated after midnight. Spectre follows routine, cannot deviate unless interrupted. Murder is the anchor, guilt the gear. She reached the final page. A date, February 18th, 1913. Followed by the night she died. Clara stared at it. That wasn't Edmund's death date. It was 50 years before he was born. She stared at the tall clock again. Had Edmund discovered what? A haunting? A memory loop? A moment in time trapped within brass and gears? Or had he created it? That night, Clara did not light the fire. She did not drink tea. She did not try to sleep. She sat in a chair in the hallway, wrapped in a shawl, eyes fixed on the attic stairs. At 11:45, the house began to change. The walls no longer felt firm. The wallpaper shimmered, the floral patterns bleeding at the edges like watercolor under rain. The wind moaned against the window panes, but only from inside. She clutched the attic key. When the mantel clock struck midnight, the chime came again from above. She climbed. The attic door opened without resistance. The clocks were already ticking. This time she waited by the entrance, candle high. The figure returned. Same long coat, same bowed head, same measured steps. But this time Clara followed. She watched him pause at the bench, saw his hands reach for something invisible. Then, again, the mimic of the stab. But this time he turned. Not his full face, just the cheek, the jaw, the mouth. And he spoke. No sound, but the shape of the words were clear. Forgive me. Clara stepped forward. Who are you? She asked, her voice a whisper swallowed by the clocks. The figure faded again, but something remained. A new item on the workbench? She crossed the floor slowly and found a small brass key, delicate, etched with the same strange looped symbol. Not a ghost. A gift. Or perhaps an invitation. Downstairs, Clara placed the brass key beside Edmund's old journal. Her fingers trailed over the leather cover. She remembered how he had guarded this book from her, how he'd once caught her opening it and gone pale as paper. He had feared something, not just the truth, but what she might become if she ever discovered it. She lit a candle and opened to the first page. In Edmund's hand, I see her every night. She walks the house, but the clocks bind her. She is looking for what was taken from her. I'm afraid, because she knows I hear her, and she will not stop until I listen. Clara turned the page, her mouth dry. The next entry was newer, dated only a month before Edmund died. The clock struck midnight. She spoke to me this time. She said my name. She called me Edward, but Edward is not my name. The candle flickered, and outside the wind carried a name through the eaves, long forgotten but not gone. Edward. Chapter 3. The name she spoke. It was not Edmund's name. Clara stared at the journal by candlelight, the looping Edward inked as if with trembling hands. The fire on the wick hissed slightly, burning lower, and outside, wind combed the house in long, eerie strokes. Her husband had died 6 months ago, but this had started before his death. Before the stroke, before the silence, before the attic door had ever creaked open to her. Edward. The ghost had called him that, and he had written it down as if it were true. But Clara knew every corner of Edmund's past, or at least she had believed she did. Was Edward another man? Or was he another self? She turned the pages, hands steady despite the chill climbing up her arms. The entries blurred with urgency now, the writing faster, sloppier. She walks in a loop. She does not see me until I speak her name, but I do not yet know it. The clock, it remembers. The house, it listens. I wear his coat now. I think she knows. She thinks I am him. And then, she was not killed. She was silenced. The truth was hidden behind gears. The chime was her last breath. Clara felt a weight settle into her chest. This wasn't grief or guilt. It was inheritance. This mystery. This memory, this ghostly pattern she had walked into, it had always been waiting for her. Perhaps even before Edmund had found it. That morning she wandered the house in a daze. The tall windows let in long sheets of gray light. Dust floated in the air like ash, and the silence was cavernous. She stood in the drawing room, surrounded by old portraits, faded, cracked paintings of strangers with Edmund's eyes and no names. The estate had once belonged to the Avery family, Edmund's ancestors, but the names had faded from history. Even in their marriage, Edmund had rarely spoken of them. "It's not a past worth remembering," he once said. But Clara wondered now if he had truly forgotten, or if he had simply been afraid of remembering too clearly. She stepped closer to one portrait. A woman in gray velvet, pale hands folded. Her face half shadowed by the artist's brush, but her expression held sorrow, not painted, but captured, like something preserved in amber. Something eternal, and beneath the cracked frame, barely legible, was a single name etched into the brass. Lenora. The name struck Clara like a stone dropped into still water. Lenora. She mouthed it once, twice. And the air in the room shifted. No wind. No windows open. But the chill came all the same. Clara looked up. In the corner of the room, just above the fireplace, the old pendulum clock twitched. It had not moved in years. But now the pendulum gave a slow, languid swing. Once. Twice. The same rhythm as the chimes in the attic. She climbed the attic stairs again at dusk, the brass key she had found now on a ribbon around her neck. The clocks did not tick yet. They waited for night, for midnight. But Clara did not want to wait this time. She wanted answers. She crossed the attic to the workbench and placed the key gently into the slot she'd noticed below the tall grandfather clock's panel. It slid in easily, almost willingly. A soft click. And then the entire front of the clock face shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, neatly stacked and wrapped in oilcloth, were letters. Old. Frayed at the edges. But the script inside was graceful, elegant. And not Edmund's. The first one began. My dearest Edward, I know you cannot come for me. Not yet. But I hear the chimes. I know you remember. I know you've kept me alive somehow on these gears and echoes. When the 12th hour strikes, I feel closest to the truth. I see the flicker of you in the hall. If you are reading this, I beg you, finish the work. Let me rest. End what he began. The letter was unsigned, but Clara already knew who had written it. Lenora. She flipped to another envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with a wax emblem, the Avery crest. The letter inside was colder, rigid. To whom it may concern, the matter of Miss Lenora Grafton is closed. Her disappearance shall remain undocumented at the family's request. Any inquiry will be treated as traces. The incident in the upper hall, while tragic, has no bearing on the inheritance. Signed, Lord Percival Avery. Clara felt a sickness roll through her stomach. A murder hidden, a woman erased, a ghost imprisoned. The clock had not simply remembered time. It had remembered injustice. And now it replayed it night after night. Because no one had ever listened. Until now. That night, Clara stood in the attic before the tall clock. It was near midnight. The air shimmered faintly, as if time were vibrating just beneath the surface of the walls. The hands on the tall clock ticked closer. 11:58. She closed her eyes and whispered the name aloud. Lenora. And when she opened them, the attic changed. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But the wallpaper reformed in patches. The dust receded. The benches straightened. For a moment, Clara was no longer in her century. She was inside Lenora's final hour. And there, across the room, Lenora appeared. Fully. Not a blur. Not a loop. A woman in gray velvet. Alive. Or something like it. Clara stepped forward, and Lenora turned her face. Her eyes were full of pain and recognition. You're not Edward, she said softly, but you carry his grief. Clara nodded. I carry his work. The ghost's gaze deepened. Then you must finish it. Tell me how, Clara whispered. And Lenora reached out. Her fingers brushed Clara's hand, cold like moonlight on iron, and a vision surged through Clara's mind. A hallway. A scream. A man, Lord Percival, shoving Lenora backward. A fall. A crack of wood. A clock striking 12. Blood seeping into the grooves of the gear-shaped floorboard. Clara gasped and stumbled back. Lenora's form flickered. You saw it, she said. Clara nodded, breathless. Now, Lenora whispered, tell the house what it never heard. And she vanished. The chimes rang out, clear and deep. But this time they did not echo a murder. They remembered a witness. Chapter 4. The Witness Beneath the Floor. Clara didn't descend the attic stairs for nearly an hour. The weight of the vision, Lenora's final moments, sat heavy on her chest like frost that refused to thaw. Her hands trembled as she relit the stub of a candle. Her breath clouded in the air, even though no window was open. She had seen it. The murder. The house had hidden it well. polishing its hallways and painting over the blood-soaked truth with generations of silence. But now the gears had turned again, and in turning, they remembered. Lenora had been pushed, no, shoved, by Lord Percival Avery. Her death wasn't an accident. It was punishment. For love, for defiance, for secrets Clara hadn't yet uncovered. One thing was clear. The clocks weren't haunted. They were testimonies. Clara spent the next day in the library, its windows clouded with April fog. The books here were older than most tombstones, their spines etched with flaking gold, titles obscured by time and disinterest. Edmund had rarely used the room, said it smelled like wet ghosts. But now the scent of aged vellum and damp cedar only sharpened her focus. She dug into the Avery family line. Old estate records, private correspondences, half-forgotten ledgers tucked inside hollowed encyclopedias. There she found him. Percival Avery, born 1839, died 1898. Buried in the family plot behind the chapel. No mention of a wife. But a single line caught her attention in a financial register. Special repairs to attic flooring, June 1871. Carpentry by J. Thatch. Discretion requested. Why discretion for attic repairs? She traced her finger down the page. The date matched the month Lenora's vision had replayed, the summer of 1871. Beneath the repair invoice was a penciled note, barely legible in the ledger's margin. Ensure mechanism is sealed before burial. Clara's pulse quickened. Mechanism? Burial? Was something hidden beneath the floor? A gear? A lock? Evidence? Or something more intentional? She snapped the ledger shut and rushed up the attic stairs, the candle flickering with her breathless pace. Back in the attic, the air had a different texture. Heavier, as though the house knew she was getting closer. Clara knelt by the grandfather clock, her knees creaking with the wooden boards, and felt around the base with careful hands. The wood here had a strange give to it, slightly raised, less worn than the others. She tapped gently. Hollow. Her breath hitched. She grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the workbench and wedged it beneath the lip of the board. With a quiet groan of wood separating from wood, the panel loosened, then lifted. Inside was a cavity, shallow, lined in tin. Dust filled its corners, but there was something nestled in the cinder beneath a black cloth. She reached in and unwrapped it slowly. It was a locket. and beneath that, a small, rusted metal key. Not the ornate kind that belonged to a jewelry box. A skeleton key. With trembling fingers, Clara opened the locket. Inside, behind the glass, was a miniature sketch. Two figures, a man and a woman. He was unmistakably Edward, Edmund's face, softened by youth. But the woman beside him, though drawn in a few deft strokes, was hauntingly familiar. Lenora! And between them, tiny etching, summer of our escape. They had planned to leave. She hadn't simply been killed for defiance. She had been killed for love. That night, Clara didn't wait for the clock to chime. She returned to the attic just before midnight and stood before the grandfather clock, the locket in her left palm, the skeleton key in her right. The shadows lengthened as the hour crept toward 12. The room remained cold, but calm, as if it, too, were holding its breath. She whispered into the stillness, "I found your escape." And then to the house itself, she added, "I know you were listening all along. Let her speak." The clock began to tick. Soft, measured, certain. Then the first chime. And with it, Lenora reappeared. But this time she wasn't walking a loop. She stood in the corner, as if summoned. She looked at Clara with something new in her expression. Hope, perhaps. "You found it," Lenora said, her voice clearer than ever. "You broke the cycle." "I think there's more," Clara said. "The key. The letters. What was he trying to open?" Lenora pointed to the floor near the west wall, where a worn steamer trunk sat unused for decades. Clara moved quickly, pushing it aside with effort. Beneath it was another floorboard, stained darker than the rest. She pried it up with the screwdriver. A narrow shaft descended into darkness. Not just a hiding place. A passage. "What is this?" she whispered. But Lenora didn't answer. She had turned toward the window now, staring into the night. Waiting. Clara knew what she had to do. She fetched a lantern, lit it with shaking fingers, and lowered herself into the hidden shaft. It was tight, barely enough space to crawl, and the air was thick with rot and time. Cobwebs clung to her sleeves as she descended. After a dozen feet, the shaft widened, opening into a small chamber beneath the attic floor. Inside, a box. Iron, locked, and above it, inscribed on the wall in ash. She waited. She remembered. She wept. Clara pulled out the skeleton key and fitted it into the box. It turned. With a groan, the lid creaked open. Inside were documents. Old, sealed in oilcloth. And among them a police report, filed in 1871. Unsent. It detailed the confession of Edward Avery, a man who claimed to have witnessed his brother, Lord Percival, murder Lenora Grafton during a dispute over marriage and money. A confession Edward had tried to submit. One that had been intercepted. Suppressed. Buried. Clara sank to her knees. The clocks above began to chime. But this time the sound was different. Less mournful. More released. As if the house had exhaled. Clara looked up through the shaft. Lenora was gone. Back in her bedroom, hours later, Clara sat by the fire with the documents spread around her. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but her mind felt cleaner than it had in weeks. She had evidence. She had truth. She had Lenora's voice. She didn't know yet if the world would believe it, but the house did. And somewhere she thought Edward did too. The wind outside shifted. Not a wail. Not a moan. Just silence. Honest, earned silence. And in the attic above, for the first time in years, the clock did not chime. Chapter 5. The Portrait That Blinked. The house had grown quiet. Unnaturally so. In the days after Claire unearthed the hidden chamber beneath the attic, a strange stillness settled over Black Alder House, as if the walls themselves were trying to decide whether to breathe again. The grandfather clock no longer chimed at midnight. Its silence was not peaceful, but pregnant, as though waiting. Clara kept the police report close, tucked inside a locked drawer of her late husband's desk. She hadn't yet contacted anyone, not a historian, not a solicitor, not even the local magistrate. Some deep, instinctual part of her warned that if she spoke too soon, she would lose what little truth she had uncovered. The house was like a puzzle with pieces made of smoke, too much pressure, and everything would vanish again. Instead, she wandered. She walked the corridors with Edmund's cane in hand, not for support, but for presence. Each hallway she entered, each door she opened, she did with quiet reverence and cautious dread. That was when she found the portrait. It hung in the east wing, a narrow corridor lined with paintings from the early 1800s. Clara rarely ventured here. The windows had been boarded up decades ago, and the air always carried a hint of mildew and moth powder. But that day, she was drawn there, pulled, rather, by the faint smell of lilac water, Lenora's scent. The portrait was tall and narrow, cloaked in dust and shadow. A woman stood at its center, painted in shades of twilight, long hair the color of tarnished silver, a lace collar high at her throat. She wore no expression, but her eyes. Clara froze. The eyes were open, wide, alive, watching. Clara blinked once, twice. They were just paint, just layers of oil on canvas. Weren't they? But as she stepped closer, she saw it, the faintest shimmer of moisture in the eye's corner. A glint not of varnish, but tear. Beneath it, scratched into the lower wood panel, was a single word carved with shaking hands. Why? Clara staggered back. The silence of the house deepened. And then, somewhere below, a door creaked open. She followed the sound to the main hall. There, at the foot of the stairs, was the front door, wide open. No wind, no storm, just cold, creeping fog seeping in like water through a cracked hole. She closed it gently, bolting it tight, then turned and nearly screamed. A figure stood at the base of the stairs. Not Lenora. A man. His back was turned, but he wore a heavy wool coat, faded with age, and he leaned ever so slightly on a walking stick with a brass raven head. Clara's heart thudded in her chest. "Edmund?" she whispered. The figure turned. It was not Edmund. But the face, it bore his features, older, gaunter, eyes hollowed by time and guilt. "Edward," Clara breathed. "You're Edward." The figure nodded once. He didn't speak. Instead, he raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the second-floor corridor. Then he faded, like a ripple in smoke, into the air. Clara followed the path he had indicated, her fingers tracing the wallpaper for balance. She stopped before a door she had never opened, its knob tarnished, its keyhole choked with dust. She tried the skeleton key. It turned. Inside was a room untouched by time. A writing desk, a piano, a music box still wound tight, waiting for fingers long since dust. On the desk was a leather-bound journal. Clara opened it carefully. The pages belonged to Edward. They were dated from the year after Lenora's death. And they were desperate. "I saw her again last night, not in dream. She stood by the hearth and whispered of the river. Percival watches me. He knows I kept something, but he won't find it. They sealed the clock not to silence her, but to silence me. If someone ever reads this, please do not trust the mirror in the stairwell." Clara's hand trembled. She had never paid much attention to that old mirror. It was large, framed in blackened mahogany. It had always reflected strangely, warped around the edges, as though it remembered other versions of the room. She left Edward's chamber and descended the stairs. The mirror waited near the landing. She stood before it. For a moment she saw only herself. Then the flicker. A figure behind her. A woman. Long hair, eyes dark with sorrow. She turned. No one there. She faced the mirror again. This time the reflection didn't match. In the mirror she was still turned away, watching something behind her. She gasped, stumbled back, and the mirror cracked down the center, the glass splitting like thin ice. From behind it, the faint tick of a clock began. Clara leaned close. The sound was coming from within the wall. The mirror hadn't just been decor. It was a barrier, a passage. She ran her hand along the frame's edge until she found a notch, small, square, and smooth. A keyhole. The skeleton key fit. She turned it. The mirror swung outward like a door. Behind it, a narrow tunnel carved between the walls, the scent of old oil and iron rising like breath from a crypt. At its end, a single clock ticked. Small, unassuming. And beneath it, a stool. She stepped in. Saturday. Waited. The air pressed in. And then Lenora sat across from her. No longer ghostly. Not quite human. A memory made flesh. You found it, she whispered. The last echo. What is this place? The one room he never entered. Where Edward hid the truth. Where the time never moved forward. Clara looked around. The room was circular. Timeless. You need to finish it, Lenora said. Clara swallowed. Finish what? The chime, she said. The one he silenced. It's the only way to free us all. Clara stared at the tiny clock on the wall. Its minute hand trembled, locked just before midnight. She reached forward and pushed. The hand clicked into place. Midnight. The clock began to chime. Once. Twice. 3 times. With each tone, the walls seemed to breathe. Lenora smiled. And faded. Not with pain. Not with sorrow. But with release. Back in her room, Clara stood at the window, watching the first light of dawn pierce through the fog. For the first time in weeks, the house felt warm, awake, and at peace. The ghosts were no longer hiding. They had been heard. And somewhere, perhaps in the spaces between time, the clockmaker's widow had finally turned the last key. Chapter 6. The Whispering Dust. The silence that followed the midnight chime was unlike any Clara had known. It was not the hush of peace, nor the lull of slumber, but something deeper, as if the house, having finally exhaled a long-held breath, was now listening. Every floorboard, every beam of timber, every dusty mirror seemed to strain towards some sound yet to come. But it did not come. Lenora was gone. So was the narrow passage behind the mirror. The next morning, Clara opened the secret door again to be sure. But the tunnel had collapsed in on itself. Stone and splinters, like a grave, caved in. The clock that had once counted the hour in that timeless room was gone too, as if it had only existed for that one moment of truth. Clara returned to the east wing, to the corridor of portraits, her thoughts drawn back to the image of Lenora. The eyes that had seemed to blink now looked dull. The tear she had seen was gone. But there was something else. A smear of gray across the portrait's lower frame. Dust, disturbed, not by her. Clara narrowed her eyes. Someone or something had been here. Recently, that evening, the grandfather clock chimed again. Not at midnight. At 11. A single chime, flat and strangled, as though echoing through water. Clara sat upright in her chair. The fire in the hearth dimmed slightly, shadows lengthening like reaching fingers. She approached the clock, heart thudding. The face had shifted, minutely but undeniably. The Roman numerals, once pristine, now looked worn, as though time itself were decaying. She opened the glass pane. Inside, the pendulum trembled, and behind it, tucked beneath the weights, was something wrapped in oilcloth. Clara pulled it free. A letter sealed in wax that bore no crest. She broke it open with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the voice within it was chillingly clear. To whoever still listens within these walls, she is not the only one. Lenora's voice was just the beginning. There are others buried in this place, not by earth, but by memory. I hear them still, in the rafters, in the ash behind the bricks. One even speaks from beneath the floorboards near the music room. They whisper when the wind does not blow. You must not trust the dust. It remembers too much. If you follow the chimes, you will find the story they buried alive. E. Clara read the letter 3 times. Others, she whispered, voices buried in dust. She turned her gaze toward the music room. The room had always unsettled her. Even in daylight, it felt wrong, tilted somehow, as if built slightly askew. A grand piano stood in the center, veiled in a cloth that had yellowed over decades. She lifted the edge. The ivory keys were cracked, and one of them, the C above middle, was stained dark. A memory, not a note. Clara knelt beside the instrument, running her hands along the floorboards. They creaked and groaned, but one near the far wall sank lower than the rest. She pressed harder. It gave way, and beneath it, embedded in the dust and darkness, was a small wooden trapdoor. No hinges, just a carved ring of iron for pulling. Clara hesitated. Then she gripped the ring and pulled. The door moaned open with the sound of breath escaping an old lung. Beneath it, only blackness, and then the scent of lilac. But not Lenora's. Fainter, powdery, old. Clara lit a candle and descended. The stairwell was narrow, carved directly into stone, and each step down seemed to stretch longer than the last. By the time her feet touched the dirt floor, she was no longer sure she was under the music room at all. The space was circular, like the chamber behind the mirror. But colder. Here, the dust whispered. Literally. Soft murmurs swirled in the air like wind over parchment. Clara held the candle higher and gasped. The walls were covered in names. Carved by hand, over years, decades, maybe longer. Some were elegant, some scrawled in childish loops. Dozens of them. Judith, Mariah, Edith, Samuel, Lawrence, Beatrice. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The last name etched into the wall. Clara Ashcroft. Her own. fresh, still damp with dust. She turned around, suddenly certain someone stood behind her. No one, but the whispers grew louder. And then she saw the cradle, half buried in the far corner, draped in a blanket that had once been blue. Within it, a rag doll with one button eye and a stitched mouth that had been torn open. The whispers gathered around it like moths to flame. She reached toward it. The doll moved, only slightly, as if reacting to breath. Then the whispering stopped. The room was silent again, but not empty. Behind her, she heard a soft voice. Clara. She turned. At the bottom of the stairs stood a child, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, pale, hair damp with some unseen moisture. He looked up at her with wide eyes. Why did you wake them up? He asked. I didn't mean to, Clara whispered. The child smiled, sadly. You opened the chime. Now they remember. Who are you? She asked. I used to be Daniel, before the fire. What fire? The one in 1862. They said it was an accident, but I saw the matches. They didn't want anyone to find the cradle. Clara felt the chill seep into her bones. She looked around the chamber, at the cradle, at the names, at the dust curling in the air. These were all children? He nodded. All of us. By who? His gaze lifted, past her, toward the ceiling. By him. And then the candle went out. When Clara awoke, she was back in the music room. The floorboard lay open beside her. But the trapdoor beneath it? Gone. Only wood and dirt remained. The chime of the grandfather clock echoed from the hall. 12. Midnight again. The dust on the piano danced in the moonlight like ash rising from an old, forgotten pyre. Clara stood. She knew now that Lenora's death had only been the first thread in the tapestry. There were more voices, more stories, more ghosts. And somewhere above, the portrait with blinking eyes watched her still. Chapter 7, Where the Dust Remembers. The sky hung low over the manor the next morning, swollen with clouds that threatened neither rain nor relief. Just a weight, gray and endless, that mirrored the heaviness inside Clara. She hadn't slept. Not really. Each time her eyes closed, they returned to that name on the wall, Clara Ashcroft, carved in wet dust beneath the manor. And the child, Daniel, the cradle. And his final word, him. A single pronoun carried like a curse through the bones of the house. She had grown up with stories of her grandfather, Vincent Ashcroft, the revered clockmaker. A gentleman, people said. Patient, brilliant, perhaps a little eccentric, but adored. But Clara had begun to wonder if the silence surrounding his legacy was more deliberate than innocent, if the stillness wasn't reverence, but fear. She returned to the attic that afternoon, the candle lantern swinging in her grip, The air was dry and bitter, filled with the scent of old varnish and time-worn secrets. The grandfather clock stood silent again. Dead. No chime, no hum. But when Clara knelt to check beneath its face, she found a key tucked behind the pendulum, a small iron piece shaped like an hourglass, cold to the touch. And engraved on the stem, Veritas, Latin for truth. Clara didn't know what it unlocked, but it felt heavy with purpose. Her breath fogged the glass pane of the clock as she stood. Her own reflection flickered, but not in time with her movements. Her hand reached for the knob a moment before her mind did. And somewhere behind her, in the dusty veil of the attic, a chair creaked. She turned sharply. Nothing. Yet the air shifted, like something had just vacated the space. She moved toward the far end of the attic, where crates and furniture were draped in mildewed sheets. And there, tucked between a moth-eaten chaise and a forgotten music stand, she saw something small and familiar. A button. Wooden. Scratched. The twin of the one-eyed doll in the cradle. It rested in the dust, as if recently placed there. Clara bent to pick it up, and froze. Beneath the button, etched into the floor, was another name. Isadora. Not a family member Clara knew. Not a name in the family tree her mother once showed her. But beside it, carved faintly, was the Ashcroft sigil. The girl had lived here, or died here. Or both. She pocketed the key and the button, trying not to think of what it meant for the children, the ones who had not left. The ones who still wandered the echoes of this house. That night, Clara waited for midnight. Not in her room, but in the corridor of portraits. Each canvas seemed to breathe as she passed, their eyes tracking her movements in silent judgment. She stood before Lenora's portrait. The tear was there again, but this time it moved. Not rolled, not dripped, but rose upward, as if time inside the painting reversed for a heartbeat. Clara stepped back. The chime began. 12 resonant tolls. And on the final note, Lenora blinked, then opened her mouth. No sound came, but her lips moved, silently, urgently. Clara focused, reading them. He lied to all of us. Then the portrait was still. The library had always been forbidden to her as a child. It was the one room always locked, even after the manor had fallen into disrepair. Clara had never questioned it. Now she did. She tried the door. Locked. She held up the iron key. It slid into the lock like it belonged. With a soft click, the door swung open on hinges that hadn't turned in years. The scent was overwhelming. Ink, old leather, and something fainter, wax. The kind used to seal letters. The room was circular, with high shelves stacked like walls of memory. At the center stood a desk layered in dust, and above it, a skylight rimmed with frost. Clara approached the desk, brushing off layers of grime. What she found beneath made her stomach twist. A ledger. Not of names. Of times. Each entry was dated, each one noted with precision, hour, minute, second. And beside them, a description. 8:42 p.m. Silence heard behind mirror. 12 a.m. Chime returns. Portrait cries again. 3:13 a.m. Girl in blue calls for mother. 12 a.m. Lenora weeps. 12 a.m. Lenora chokes. 12 a.m. Lenora dies. The last line was dated over 80 years ago. Clara turned the page. More entries, more deaths. All centered around midnight. All tied to rooms in the house. One line read, "Children returned. Daniel among them. Tried to escape again." And beside that entry, another scrawled in a different hand, hastier. "Bury the cradle deeper." The page after that was torn out. Clara closed the book, hands shaking. She now knew that the house had not simply forgotten the children. It had been designed to forget. By someone who wrote everything down, who watched, and who wanted the truth to stay hidden in the chimes and the dust. She was no longer just a visitor. She was now part of the ledger. One more echo in the making. Chapter 8, The Room That Waits. The air had turned colder since Clara unlocked the library. Even with no windows open and no storm outside, the manor sighed with the weight of something stirring beneath its skin, like bones resettling in an old body after a long sleep. She slept, finally, but shallowly. The chimes didn't wake her that night. Instead, she dreamt of the cradle. Again. But this time it was not empty. A bundle lay swaddled in gray linen, stitched with the letter D. A tiny hand reached for her, its palm ink-stained, whispering her name not in a child's voice, but in her husband's. "Clara," it murmured, "he made me." She woke with the words in her ears and the feeling that someone had just left the room. The next morning, Clara returned to the library, but the door was open when she arrived. She hadn't left it that way. The ledger on the desk was gone. In its place was a small, cracked photo frame, face down. She turned it over. The photograph inside was black and white, faded with age. A family stood on the manor's front steps. Vincent Ashcroft, unmistakable with his silver beard and proud eyes. Beside him, a woman Clara didn't recognize, younger, pale. But what caught her breath was the little boy clinging to Vincent's hand. Daniel, it was him. Clara knew it with a certainty that burned. The back of the photo had only 3 words. The first chime. Clara turned to the shelves behind her, feeling the weight of that phrase. If Daniel was the first, how many more had come after? And what had they become? She traced the house's layout again, this time with the photo in her pocket and the iron key strung around her neck. Her steps led her to a narrow hallway on the manor's eastern wing, one she had avoided in childhood because it always felt too narrow, too watched. At the end of the corridor was a door she'd never opened, painted black, its frame warped by time. Something behind it pulsed, quietly, like a heartbeat in the wall. She tried the doorknob. Locked. She hesitated, then tried the iron key. It didn't fit. But the pendant she wore, the locket Henry gave her, suddenly warmed on her skin. Clara opened it. Inside, the miniature clock face was still ticking, but beneath it was a tiny pinhole she'd never noticed before. She pressed the locket against the lock. With a slow groan, the door opened. Inside was a room frozen in time. Wallpaper curled at the corners, yellowed by years, but Clara recognized the print, the same as the attic's, the same as the dreams. A child's bed sat at the center. Dust-covered toys surrounded it in a perfect circle. Above the bed, scrawled into the wall in a shaky hand, "He winds the clock, we wind the dead." Clara stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind her. The room shifted, no longer just old, but alive with memory. She turned, and the toys had moved. The jack-in-the-box that had been near the window was now at her feet. The little wooden train was circling the bed on a track that hadn't existed seconds ago. A whisper echoed from the walls. "Stay, stay, stay." She turned back toward the door. "Gone!" Only wallpaper stretched across the wall now, seamless and whole. She touched it, and a face pressed out from behind, stretching the paper like thin skin. Not Daniel. Henry. His eyes hollow, his mouth open, whispering the same thing the dream child had said. He made me. The wallpaper tore. Behind it, nothing. Just an opening. A hollow space between the walls. Clara stepped through. It was a crawl space, low and narrow, but dry. Safe in a way the house above never felt. Her candle lantern flickered as she moved forward. The space opened into a chamber lit by a single oil lamp. She froze. In the center of the room sat a man, or what remained of one, dressed in an ash-colored suit, hands stained with oil and ink. His eyes were glass, fixed forward, but the shape of his nose, the line of his jaw, Clara knew them. He looked like her father. No, like Vincent Ashcroft. And beside him, ticking away with impossible rhythm, stood a machine unlike anything Clara had seen. It looked like a clock, but with arms. One arm held a quill. The other turned gears. At its heart, a pocket watch embedded like a pulsing heart. It was writing. Endless pages spilled from its base. Ledgers. Names. Times. Clara stepped closer and read the last name written. Clara Ashcroft. 10:53 p.m. Enters the room. Fails to escape. The next entry was blank, waiting. And above it, engraved into the brass. The clock remembers. The machine turned toward her. Its face, Vincent's. Not alive, not dead, but remembering. Clara screamed. The candle died. The machine stopped. And then, for the first time since she arrived, the manor was silent. No ticking. No chime. Only breath. Her own. Clara turned and fled the chamber, back through the hollow walls, back into the nursery. The wallpaper now bled with ink, names and times pouring across it like veins. She ran. Downstairs, past the portraits, and they all turned their heads to watch. Lenora, Daniel, the unnamed girl, Isadora, even Henry. All watching, not to stop her, but to see if she would make it. To what she did not know. Clara burst through the front doors just as the clock in the attic struck midnight. But this time, no ghost walked. The manor did not answer. Because for the first time in decades, the clock was missing its keeper. Chapter 9. What the House Remembers. The night held its breath. Clara stood at the threshold of Ashcroft Manor, her breath clouding in the air as though winter had taken root inside her lungs. The front doors gaped behind her like an open mouth, silent, waiting. She should have run. She could have fled down the overgrown drive, left the keys, the clock, the ghost to rot in the walls where they belong. But the silence chased her. It wasn't peace, it was absence. The chimes had stopped. The ghost no longer walked. And the house, for the first time in its long cursed history, felt empty. Too empty, as though something had been removed that shouldn't have. As though something else had been let loose. She turned back and stepped inside. The hall had changed, subtly, enough to send shivers up her spine. The portraits on the walls, Vincent, Lenora, Daniel, and the unnamed ones, were all blurred now, their faces smudged as if by trembling fingers. Only one remained clear. Henry. And his expression had changed. In all her years with him, he'd worn kindness like a coat, quietly and without pride. But now, his painted smile was too wide and the eyes too dark. She touched the frame. It was warm. A low, rhythmic sound echoed from the depths of the house. Not a chime. A heartbeat. Not hers. Clara followed the sound through the narrowing corridors, their wallpaper now pulsing with faint veins of gold, as though the house was becoming flesh, or perhaps always had been. Each room she passed was sealed, doors locked, windows clouded with frost from the inside. The light grew dimmer, though no time had passed. Finally, she came to the grandfather clock in the foyer. It was open. Gutted! The gears had been removed, the pendulum ripped out. The heart of the house was missing, and something had taken its place. A folded note lying like a tongue in the hollow of the clock. She picked it up. One word. Come. The walls led her to the western wing, the part of the manor they'd never restored, the oldest bones of the house. Rooms closed since the first Ashcrofts laid their roots in stone. The heartbeat grew louder with every step. Boom! 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 It wasn't hers. It wasn't human. It was mechanical. She passed under a rotting archway, and the air changed. It grew thicker, and the walls began to hum, not with electricity, but with memory. Whispers brushed her shoulders. Her name spoken backwards. Her name as a child. Her name in Henry's voice. Clara, Clara, don't look back. She didn't, until the corridor ended in a mirror. Oval, tall as a door, framed in tarnished brass, etched with sigils. She saw herself, but not as she was. In the reflection, she was older, worn. Her dress was black, not mourning attire, but something ceremonial. And behind her, the attic, and within it, the clock ticking again. She reached out. The mirror rippled and pulled her in. She stood in the attic. But it was not night. It was the past. The air buzzed with youth. The floor creaked beneath toys that hadn't yet turned sinister. The wallpaper was new. And there was a man at the workbench. Vincent. No doubt this time. He worked with fervor, sweat on his brow, hands stained with ink and iron. In front of him, the clock. But inside the clock, nestled like a sacrificial offering, was a lock of hair. Dark and curled. Lenora's. Vincent whispered to it. You will not leave me. He turned the crank. The clock shuddered. And time broke. The attic twisted, screamed. The clock did not tell time. It trapped it, bound it in brass and blood, and fed it names. Clara stepped back, but her foot struck something metal. A small ticking device. The Clockmaker's journal. She picked it up. Page after page of names. Experiments. Attempts. Failures. Then one final entry, barely legible beneath a streak of blood. Lenora is fading. Daniel is changing. But Clara, she has his blood. She will be the last. She will set it right. If she remembers. The attic went dark. The past dissolved. And Clara stood alone again. In the present. But the clock was ticking. And the whispers returned. Not from the attic. From the mirror behind her. She turned. Henry stood there, but not in the way she remembered. He was part of the clock now. His skin bore the brass work of gears. His hands were no longer warm but ticking metronomes, and his eyes, still his, were pleading. Clara, he said, you must stop it. I don't understand, she whispered. You do. His voice was distant, like a memory unraveling. You saw the chamber. You saw the names. He didn't build a machine. He built a prison. She shook her head. A prison for what? For the soul. The clock in the attic began to chime. Once. Twice. Midnight, Henry whispered. One chime left. If it strikes 12. He didn't finish, because the mirror shattered. And Clara was back in the manor, staring at the empty frame. Only this time, her reflection was gone. She ran. The stairs twisted. The wallpaper crawled. Names spilled from the walls, ink black and endless. She reached the attic door. Inside, the clock stood whole again, and ticking. At its center, the watch Henry gave her. The machine turned toward her, its face flickering through all the Ashcrofts. Vincent, Daniel, Lenora, and Henry. She stepped forward and placed her palm against the glass face. The machine hissed, paused, then whispered, "The widow winds the end." Clara took a breath and turned the key. Chapter 10. The Final Chime. The key turned. The final mechanism clicked into place. In time shuddered. The walls of the attic expanded with a breath, then exhaled a long and mournful sigh that passed through the beams and bones of Ashcroft Manor. The floor shifted beneath Clara's feet, not violently, but deliberately, like the stirring of something long dormant. The clock was awake, and it was watching her. A faint golden glow bled from its hands, circling its face like a halo as the pendulum swung once. Clara felt it brush something inside her, as though it wasn't just measuring seconds, but her memories. A whisper threaded the air. Midnight has come. Clara stepped back, her hand trembling. The attic had transformed. The dusty relics were gone. No cobwebs, no rot. In their place, shelves of polished wood, rows of clocks in every shape and size, ticking in perfect unison. Each one bore a name. Lenora, Daniel, Vincent, Margaret, Henry. And now, Clara. She stared at the tiny brass plaque beneath a rosewood clock. Clara Whitlock Ashcroft. The clock ticked once. She wasn't dead, but something inside her had been marked. "Am I next?" she whispered, her voice nearly stolen by the hush that fell over the room. "No," came a voice, not from behind her, but from within the grandfather clock itself. She turned to it. Henry stood inside the glass, faint and flickering like a candle in a storm. "You're not meant to be trapped, Clara. You're meant to be the key." "The key to what?" "To releasing the others." The air shimmered. And then she saw them, ghostly shapes emerging from the walls, the clocks, the corners where dust used to cling. Each spirit bore the sorrow of time denied. Lenora's translucent gown dragging behind her, Daniel's shadowed face half-formed, Vincent's eyes glassy with obsession. They did not move with anger. They moved with hope. Henry stepped forward, his presence gaining weight, as though love itself had given him mass. Clara, the machine wasn't meant to trap us. Not at first. Vincent tried to preserve time, to hold on to the people he lost. But obsession turned the clock inward. It began to hunger. For memories? She asked. For souls, Henry said, voice low. For everyone it marked. Every name on every plaque. Bound here forever. But why did it stop? Because you broke the cycle, he said, smiling gently. You asked questions. You listened. You remembered. The room glowed brighter now, as though light had found a way in for the first time in centuries. But how do I free you? She asked. Henry lifted his hand and pressed it to the inside of the glass. She mirrored the motion, palm to palm. One final chime, he said. The clock is no longer master. You are. But what happens to me? You choose. The house trembled. The final chime began. Soft, resonant, like a breath at the end of prayer. Clara felt it inside her bones, inside her heart. Every memory of Henry, of their laughter, of his quiet way of holding grief like a pocket watch, those moments flashed before her eyes. And then a second hand on the clock face began to spin. Not forward, not backward, but inward. The air pulled tight. Make your choice, Henry said again, his voice almost gone. She understood. The clock had always been a vessel, a prison, a gate. She could leave, shut it down forever, let the spirits rest, and herself walk out into the world again, changed but free. Or she could stay, take Henry's place, bind herself to the heart of the machine, and guide it, not as a captor, but as a guardian, so that no soul would ever be trapped again, so that time would remain sacred, so that he could go. Clara closed her eyes and turned the key once more. The house exhaled. The wallpaper peeled gently from the walls like old skin falling away, revealing pale beams beneath. The clock stilled. One by one, the spirits faded, not with sorrow, but with grace. Lenora gave Clara a grateful look. Daniel vanished with a boy's smile. Vincent, his ghost no longer gaunt but peaceful, tipped his hat and stepped into the light. And Henry, he lingered. Clara walked to the center of the attic, where the grandfather clock waited, its gears now still, but open like a blooming flower. Henry took her hand. "I'll wait," she whispered. He smiled. "No, Clara, you'll watch, and we'll all be free." And then he too was gone. In the years that followed, Ashcroft Manor stood quietly on the hill. Visitors who passed by said the house felt lighter. The air was always sweet near the western wing. And if you stood outside at exactly midnight, you might hear a single chime ring from the attic. Never 12. Just one. A heartbeat. And if you listened closely, you might hear the faint whisper of a woman's voice. Time is no prison, but it remembers.